I'm Ella Larson, 33. After years of sacrifice, I bought my dream apartment in Portlander Sanctuary of my own. But at a family dinner, my parents casually declared, "Rachel's moving in." Their faces paled when I said no. For 5 long years, I saved every extra penny to finally secure an apartment I could call my only sanctuary in downtown Portland. It wasn't just a place with exposed brick walls or sunlight spilling onto polished hardwood floors. It was proof of my hard work, a symbol of independence carved out of years of sacrifice, the late-night shifts at the campus coffee shop, the tutoring sessions squeezed between classes, the countless weekends I skipped out on friends' trips to save just a little more. This apartment was my escape from a family dynamic that often left me feeling invisible and unheard. But all of that changed during one family dinner that turned into a battlefield. My parents dropped a bombshell so casually it was almost surreal. "Your sister will live in your apartment." They said it like it was no big deal, as if the space I had fought for was somehow communal property. Inside, I was screaming, but on the outside, I just nodded and took a sip of wine, biting back every word. The look in my mother's eyes told me this wasn't a request. My sister's entitled smile confirmed it. This was a takeover. Before I get into the fallout, I want you to comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had family members treat your boundaries like suggestions. Growing up as the middle child in the Jensen family was like walking a tightrope between impossible expectations and invisibility. I was the first to graduate college, an achievement that mattered deeply to me. But to my parents, it was just the baseline, the bare minimum. They didn't see the 3 jobs I worked or the full scholarship I earned. Meanwhile, my older sister Rachel was their golden child, the artist, whose gallery shows were funded by them, whose every failure was met with understanding and a safety net. She moved in and out of their house like it was a revolving door, crashing after breakups or job troubles, carrying designer bags bought with my parents' credit cards, crying about how life had dealt her a cruel hand. And my parents? They patted her on the back with keys to vacation homes or a new car to help her bounce back. Meanwhile, I drove my old Honda Civic, the one I bought in college, and kept running through careful maintenance because I knew no one was coming to replace it. My younger brother Ethan was the baby of the family, perpetually excused from responsibility, wandering through abandoned hobbies and half-finished online courses paid for by my parents without question. We lived in separate orbits within the same family, each with wildly different expectations and support. Me? I was expected to be independent, but also endlessly accommodating, caught in a middle that felt like no one's safe place. This patamy, parents making life decisions without asking May, was nothing new. When I was 16, they signed me up to babysit my cousin's kids every weekend for a whole summer, only telling me after it was already arranged. In college, distant relatives crashing during weddings got my off-campus apartment address without my consent, with my parents calling me the morning of their arrival as if I had no right to say no. Every attempt I made to set boundaries was met with accusations of selfishness and reminders of family obligations that somehow never seemed to apply to Rachel or Ethan. But something changed last year. I finally found my footing as an environmental consultant, gaining recognition that didn't depend on my family's approval. I started seeing a therapist who helped me see that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. I even said no to hosting Thanksgiving for the first time, breaking a tradition that left me drained and unappreciated. These small wins gave me hope that I could finally take control, be an adult who made choices, not just a people pleaser. So the monthly family dinners became my compromiser way to stay connected without losing myself. But this particular Sunday dinner shattered all my boundaries. The smell of my mother's pot roast greeted me as I arrived 10 minutes later, tiny act of defiance I allowed myself. My father opened the door with a brisk hug and immediately started complaining about traffic, like my late arrival was a personal insult. Rachel was already lounging on the living room sofa, boots on the antique coffee tabler luxury I never had. Ethan showed up 20 minutes later, earning warm smiles and an affectionate, "We were about to start without you," from my mother. Dinner started as usual. Dad dominated the conversation with his politics and business opinions. Mum played her role, asking questions that were really setups to spill neighbourhood gossip. I was halfway through my carefully prepared, sanitized update about work when Dad cleared his throat the family signal that the real topic was coming. "Rachel has some news," he announced, like a presidential address. Rachel looked up from her phone with a shift from boredom to fake vulnerability. "Jason and I broke up," she said. Jason was the boyfriend I'd met once, mostly talking about cryptocurrency. "She's being unreasonable about the apartment lease," Rachel continued. "I have to keep paying even though I'm moving out." Mom reached over, squeezing Rachel's hand sympathetically. "It's just not right. She shouldn't have to deal with this stress on top of a broken heart." I nodded, the automatic sisterly response, while mentally counting the seconds till I could escape. Dad cut into his roast and said, "We've worked it all out. Rachel will move into your place while she gets back on her feet." Delivered so casually, it was like announcing a change in dinner plans, not a full-on invasion of my personal space. Mom smiled brightly, already planning. "It makes perfect sense. You have that spare room you use as an office, and you're always working late anyway. Rachel just needs a few months." That tightness in my chest returned the feeling of my boundaries being bulldozed. "I actually use my office," I said carefully, choosing words. "I've taken on freelance projects that need a dedicated workspace." Rachel rolled her eyes, dismissing me. "You can work at the kitchen table." I did that all through college. What she left out was that her college degree was art, funded entirely by my parents, stretched over 5.5 years with multiple mental health breaks. Dad added, "It's just temporary. Family helps family." Mom was already scrolling her calendar. "We'll help move her next Saturday. Your building has visitor parking, right?" They planned the dismantling of my personal sanctuary with the same enthusiasm they once showed organising Rachel's 16th birthday, while forgetting my 18th entirely. Ethan caught my eye, but quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved. I faced the crossroads I knew too well. Speak up and face the family's collective disapproval, or stay silent and give up my boundaries once more. But something inside me had shifted. Instead of panic or need to please, I felt calm clarity. "I'll need to check my lease about long-term guests," I said, neutrally no agreement, no refusal. Mom waved it off. Of course, that's just formality. They can't stop you from helping your sister." I nodded, letting them believe I was compliant while secretly planning a different path. The conversation moved on to logistics. No one asked if I had weekend plans or if I'd considered the impact. I gave minimal responses, letting my silence be mistaken for agreement. Clearing dishes after dessert, I mapped out my response, knowing acquiescence was no longer an option. Driving home, the usual emotional hangover from family dinners settled in but this time. It was different. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was righteous anger mixed with crystal clear clarity. I replayed their voices in my head, my sister assigned to my home without a single genuine question for me. The pattern was painfully clear, my needs always secondary, my space treated as public property, while my siblings' wants were prioritised. I thought of every time I swallowed my objections for peace, every small surrender that led to this expectation that I would always bend. No more. This time, I was ready to stand my ground. "Not this time," I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror, surprised by the calm strength in my voice. I could feel a shift inside me, something steady and unshakable. When I stepped into my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and walked slowly through every room, seeing it anew, appreciating the sanctuary I had carefully built for myself. The office, the one they so casually suggested I dismantle, was more than just a workspace. It was the physical manifestation of my dreams, projects that mattered deeply to me, even if my family never truly understood their value. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop. Determination replaced the usual resignation that came after these family encounters. I started by reviewing my lease agreement, confirming what I had already suspected. Subletting without management's approval was prohibited, and any guest staying longer than 2 weeks had to be added to the lease, complete with background and credit checks. Instead of seeing these as barriers, I recognized them as the foundation for my response. Next, I called Megan, my friend who had witnessed the slow erosion of my boundaries over years of friendship. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I explained the situation. "Oh, hell no, Liv. You can't let this happen again." Her indignation was exactly what I needed, a validation I rarely gave myself. Her perspective as an outsider confirmed what I already felt deep down. My family's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable. I'm not going to, I said firmly, surprising even myself. I just need to figure out how to handle this without triggering a total family meltdown. We talked through options, immediately discarding direct confrontation, which had failed every time before. My family had mastered overwhelming opposition through sheer persistence and united guilt-tripping. This time, strategy was the key action over argument. What if you just weren't there? Megan suggested. What if when they show up with Rachel's stuff, you're simply unavailable? The idea took hold instantly. I had vacation days saved, and a work conference in Seattle next month that I could move up. My mind raced with possibilities not just to avoid immediate conflict, but to set a precedent that would reshape my family relationships for good. After ending the call, I dove deeper into tenant rights, taking detailed notes on my legal protections. I emailed my building manager with questions about visitor policies and security protocols, phrasing my concerns as general interest rather than specific alarm. By midnight, my initial anxiety had morphed into meticulous planning. I created a document outlining every step I would take to secure my space and my boundaries, schedule adjustments, communication strategies, legal considerations, and contingency plans. I thought about who could temporarily occupy my apartment while I was away, someone reliable whose presence would make it impossible for my sister to move in unchecked. Derek, a colleague whose condo was under emergency repair, came to mind. Responsible, professional, and unknown to my family, he was the perfect candidate. The final piece clicked into place when I realised I could create a legitimate short-term sublease for Derek, documenting it thoroughly to withstand any of my family's inevitable attempts to circumvent it. Exhausted but empowered, I finally went to bed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't lying awake, rehearsing explanations or apologies for standing up for myself. Instead, I was planning a resolution that would force my family to recognise me as an adult with rights they could not override, no matter their expectations or entitlement. The path ahead would be uncomfortable, maybe even painful, but as I drifted off, I knew the discomfort of confrontation was far better than the slow suffocation of surrendering my independence again. The week after that tense family dinner unfolded with careful precision as I executed my plan. Monday morning, I visited the management office and spoke with Tanya, the property manager who had approved my lease 2 years ago. I'm considering having a friend stay while I'm away for work, I explained, careful to keep the tone neutral. I want to understand all policies about guests and temporary occupants. Tanya handed me the visitor guidelines and sublease paperwork, clarifying that any stay over 14 days required management approval and a background check. I nodded, feigning casual interest while mentally noting how these rules contradicted my family's assumptions. And just to clarify, I asked, if someone showed up claiming to move in without this paperwork? Absolutely not permitted, Tanya said firmly. Security would deny entry, and we take this very seriously. It's for everyone's safety and compliance with occupancy laws. Armed with this confirmation, I texted Derek during lunch. I explained my situation professionally, leaving out the family drama. I need someone responsible in my apartment while I'm away for 2 weeks. There would be a formal sublease to protect both of us. Would you be interested? Derek replied within the hour, grateful for the timing given his ongoing condo repairs. We set a meeting for Wednesday after work to finalise the arrangement. Tuesday evening, the first text from Rachel arrived. Mum says I should check with you about what furniture I should bring. I think my bedroom set would look better in your spare room than whatever you have there. The presumptuous tone confirmed my decision. I sent a deliberately vague reply. I'm figuring out some logistics about the apartment. Let's touch base next week. The non-committal response bought me time and revealed nothing. Wednesday came with purpose. I met Derek, showed him around, and explained the temporary setup. We signed the sublease, making it official with copies for management. There's one more thing, I added, uneasy but resolute. My family doesn't know about this. They might show up expecting me. If they do, you're under no obligation to let them in or explain anything except that you're the legal occupant for this period. Derek, familiar with family complications post-divorce, nodded. I can handle that. Just the facts. No drama. That evening, I booked my trip to align with Rachel's planned moving day, reserving a hotel in a nearby coastal town where I could decompress but stay reachable if needed. Thursday morning, I requested remote work accommodations from HR, citing personal circumstances requiring temporary relocation. With work secured, I began prepping my apartment, moving important documents and irreplaceable items to a storage unit I rented for the month. I documented the apartment's condition meticulously, taking photos of each room for comparison upon return. By Friday, my mother had called twice, asking about parking access and whether I could clear some bookshelves for Rachel's essentials. I replied with brief texts about being swamped with work deadlines and promises to sort everything before the weekend, crafting the appearance of busy acquiescence while finalising my counter-strategy. Saturday, I set up a small security camera in the living room, aimed at the entryway, legal precaution I never imagined needing against my own family. I gave Derek keys, the building code, and written authorization for security staff. That evening, my father texted, "We'll arrive around 11 a.m. Saturday. Have the parking pass ready and clear space in your closet for Rachel's winter clothes." His commanding tone, absent of questions or consideration for my schedule, only strengthened my resolve. Sunday morning, I met Derek for a final walkthrough, confirming he understood the boundaries, and providing emergency contacts that notably excluded my family. Packing for my trip, I felt a rare calm determination. My phone buzzed with a final text from my mother. "Rachel's so excited about her fresh start at your place. This will bring you girls closer." I left it unanswered, recognizing another attempt to frame their imposition as a gift I should be grateful for. By Sunday evening, everything was in place. I had reclaimed my power not through confrontation, but through careful planning and the legitimate exercise of my rights. Setting my phone to silent except for work and Derek, I prepared for the inevitable storm when my family's expectations met the reality I had arranged. The boundaries I had established on paper were about to be tested in real life, and for once I felt ready to stand firm against the tidal wave of family pressure that had always swept me away before. The days leading up to the planned invasion brought a steady stream of one-sided messages that confirmed my choice. Monday morning began with a text from Rachel. "I'm donating your guest room furniture to make space for my bedroom set. Hope that's cool." No question mark, no real request, just an announcement about decisions already made regarding my property. I didn't respond immediately, letting the presumption hang unanswered as I focused on preparing for my temporary absence. By midday, my mother had already called twice, leaving voicemails about paint colours Rachel was considering for her room. She also asked if I could take down the depressing photographs lining my hallway to make room for Rachel's collection of framed concert posters. The casual dismissal of my carefully curated home decor pieces I had chosen to represent memories and moments meaningful to Mesting deeply, in that familiar way it always did. Yet, it only strengthened my resolve. That Tuesday evening, my father called. His tone was a mix of authority and fake concern. "Your mother says you haven't been responding to her texts about Rachel's move. Is there a problem we need to discuss?" The question was not really an invitation for honest conversation, but a thinly veiled demand for me to fall in line with their plans. I replied, "I've been swamped with work, just finishing up some projects before the weekend." It was a half-truth, but one that came easily. His satisfied grunt told me he had taken my response as compliance exactly what I intended. Wednesday brought an escalation. Rachel sent a group text to the family announcing she had given notice at her apartment and arranged movers for Saturday. "So excited for sister bonding time," she wrote, tagging me with a string of heart emojis that felt less like affection and more like claiming territory. My mother responded enthusiastically, planning a moving day lunch they would bring to my apartment. My father chimed in with logistics about borrowing his colleague's truck for the larger furniture items. The conversation went on without me. Decisions and arrangements flew by as if my participation was optional, but my compliance was assumed. That evening, I met Megan for dinner, my last chance to see her before implementing the final phase of my plan. "They're really doing this, aren't they?" she asked, scrolling through the screenshots of my family's messages. "They have no doubt you'll just roll over and let them take over your space." I nodded, picking at my food as the weight of the coming confrontation settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. I knew this was right, but I still felt guilty, like I was being mean or selfish for not helping my sister. Megan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Liv, listen. Having boundaries isn't mean. Expecting respect isn't selfish. They're the ones being inappropriate to not you. Her words were a lifeline, a perspective I still struggled to fully embrace. Thursday brought the most presumptuous move yet. My mother forwarded an email confirmation for a furniture delivery to my address, scheduled for Monday after the move. Rachel found the perfect desk for her creative projects. Don't worry about the cost. It's our housewarming gift to her. The sheer entitlement of arranging deliveries to my home without consulting me sent a wave of indignation that momentarily overpowered my anxiety. I forwarded the confirmation to Derek with a note telling him to refuse any deliveries for Rachel. Then, I blocked my mother's email from my work account to prevent further distractions. Friday, the day before their arrival, phone began ringing incessantly. My father called 3 times during my morning meetings, leaving voicemails that grew more irritated with each attempt. "We need the visitor parking passcode," the first one said. The second demanded, "Call your mother about the parking situation." By the third, his patience had clearly snapped. "Olivia, this is ridiculous. Call us back immediately about tomorrow's arrangements." My mother's messages alternated between guilt-tripping me about Rachel's fragile emotional state after her breakup and passive-aggressive reminders about family duty. "Your sister would do this for you," she texted, conveniently forgetting the time I needed emergency housing after a pipe burst in my first apartment, and Rachel's spare room was being used for art storage. By early evening, I had packed for my weekend away and finalised arrangements with Derek, who would move in later that night. I sent an out-of-office email citing a vague but official-sounding work emergency requiring immediate travel. As I prepared to leave, my phone lit up with a final message from my father. "We'll be at your building at 11 a.m. sharp. Rachel's entire apartment is packed and ready. Don't make this difficult." The commanding tone so familiar, yet so clearly inappropriate, no-cemented my decision. I took one last look around my apartment, appreciating the calm before the storm. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing to prioritize my boundaries over my family's expectations. Despite the anxiety churning in my stomach, I felt a new sense of self-respect blooming in my chest. Locking my door and handing the keys to Derek in the hallway, I let myself face a painful truth. Sometimes, setting healthy boundaries with family feels like betrayal precisely because they've trained you to betray yourself instead. The real test would come the next day when they arrived, expecting compliance, and found their assumptions shattered against the reality I had carefully built. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear with perfect northwest autumn weather, the kind of crisp, sunny day that usually energized me. I woke up in my hotel room just 30 meters from my apartment, feeling a mixture of nervous anticipation and surprising calm about finally enforcing my boundary. My phone, kept on Do Not Disturb overnight, showed 5 missed calls from my mother starting at 7:30 a.m., 3 from my father, and a flurry of increasingly frantic texts from Rachel. At 9:15 a.m., the first message announced cheerfully, "Dad borrowed Uncle Steve's truck for my dresser, so excited." By 10:30 the tone had shifted. "Where are you? We need the parking pass." Then at 10:45, "Call Mum now, we're almost there." I sent a quick text to Derek confirming my family was on their way. His calm reply, "Got it. Everything's under control here." I silenced my phone again and ordered room service breakfast, determined to protect my mental space during what I knew would be a difficult few hours. At precisely 11:03 a.m., my security app pinged with motion detection at my apartment door. Opening the live feed, I watched as my parents and Rachel stood in the hallway outside my unit. My father was pounding on the door with increasing force while my mother rang the doorbell repeatedly. Rachel paced behind them, animatedly talking on her phone, probably trying to reach me. After several minutes of unanswered knocking, my father pulled out his phone and appeared to call building management. I pictured the weekend security staff explaining they could not provide access to anyone not on the lease, no matter the family relationship. The footage showed my family retreating temporarily, likely heading to the lobby to strategize. 20 minutes later, they returned with a building security officer. He seemed to be explaining something that caused my mother to throw her hands up in frustration. My father's posture stiffened the way it always did when faced with resistance. His usual authoritative manner failed to intimidate the security officer, who was simply doing his job. Just as they seemed ready to leave, the apartment door opened, revealing Derek in casual weekend clothes, coffee mug in hand. Even without audio, I saw my family shock their bodies, recoiling in surprise. Derek looked perfectly calm, probably explaining his legal right to be there, while my family struggled to process what was happening. My mother's hand flew to her chest in distress, and my father leaned forward aggressively until the security officer stepped between them. Rachel stood frozen, her face shifting from confusion to outrage as the reality sank in. The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes before the security officer escorted them back toward the elevator. My father's rigid stance and my mother's animated gestures spoke of barely contained anger. As they vanished from view, I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Moments later, my phone exploded with notifications voicemails from my father threatening to call the police about an unauthorized occupant or to come to my workplace Monday if I didn't respond. My mother's messages escalated from confusion to outright accusation. How could you do this to your sister? We raised you better than this. Rachel's texts were the worst, a torrent of all caps invective questioning my character, loyalty, and decency. I forwarded the most alarming messages to Megan, who had offered to help monitor things in case legal action was needed. Your family is melting down, she texted back after reading. But you're completely within your rights. Stay strong. Around 1 p.m., Derek called with a first-hand account. Your father tried to insist they had your permission to enter, he said. When I showed them the sublease agreement, he claimed it must be fake. The security guy had to remind him that trying to get in without permission could lead to police involvement. He chuckled lightly. They left when your dad realized he was making a scene in front of neighbors. Your mum said they'd address this betrayal with you directly. I thanked Derek for handling it so professionally and asked if he felt comfortable continuing our arrangement despite the conflict. Through it all, I felt a quiet strength building inside me. This was my space, my boundaries. And finally, I was standing my ground. Absolutely, he assured me calmly. Your family's drama doesn't change our agreement. Your home is secure. By early evening, the initial flood of calls and texts had slowed, replaced by a more calculated and strategic approach. My aunt called next, clearly enlisted as a mediator, her voice gentle but rehearsed with practiced concern. Everyone's worried about you, Olivia. This isn't like you shutting out your family when they need you. I let her voicemail play all the way through but didn't return the call. I recognized this familiar pattern using extended family as a way to apply pressure when direct methods had failed. Later, my father's final message of the day came through at 10:30 p.m. His voice was deliberately controlled, but the anger beneath was unmistakable. Your mother is distraught. Rachel has nowhere else to go. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. This childish stunt ends now. Call us in the morning to arrange access to your apartment. As I prepared for bed in my quiet hotel room, a surprising sense of peace settled over me despite the day's chaos. For the first time, I had set a clear boundary and held it firm against the tidal wave of family pressure. The guilt and anxiety still lingered the usual companions after years of emotional conditioning, but alongside them was something new and fragile: pride in my own strength. The certainty that I deserved the basic respect of being consulted about my own living space. Tomorrow would undoubtedly bring more confrontation as my family adjusted to this new reality. But tonight, I allowed myself to embrace a simple truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both yourself and others is to stop participating in unhealthy patterns. Even when, especially when, that disruption causes discomfort, the path to healthier relationships begins with the courage to say no when saying yes would cost your self-respect. Sunday morning arrived with a strange quietness, the stillness that follows upheaval, like the calm after a storm. First thing, I checked my security feed and felt relieved no unexpected visitors had tried to return to my apartment overnight. My phone showed fewer messages than expected, suggesting my family might be regrouping to form a new plan. The first text came from Rachel at 7:15 a.m., her tone drastically different from the rage of yesterday. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I have nowhere to go. Is this because of that time I borrowed your sweater in high school and stretched it out? I said I was sorry for that. The attempt to minimize the situation by dragging up a trivial past conflict instead of acknowledging the real boundary violation happening now was so typical of our family dynamics that I almost laughed despite the tension. I didn't respond. I recognized this message as the first move in the familiar dance of deflection and guilt manipulation. By mid-morning, my mother had shifted from anger to bargaining. Her voicemail was filled with compromises that still fundamentally ignored my autonomy. Maybe Rachel could stay just 2 weeks while she found another place. We could pay you a little rent if that's what this is about. Family helps family, Olivia. The suggestion that my boundary was motivated by money rather than basic respect for my space revealed how deeply she misunderstood me. My father's communication evolved as well, moving from commands to carefully reasoned arguments. I understand you feel we should have discussed this more thoroughly. That's fair. Let's sit down like adults and work out a solution that helps your sister while respecting your concerns. His measured tone couldn't hide the underlying assumption. The end result would still be Rachel moving into my apartment, only now with a veneer of my consent to legitimize the plan. Around noon, an unexpected text arrived from my brother Ethan, who had stayed conspicuously silent throughout the conflict. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Rachel's staying at their place and complaining non-stop. Not sure exactly what happened, but whatever you did to stand up to them, respect. His message was the first acknowledgement from any family member that my resistance might be justified. It offered a small but meaningful counterbalance to the overwhelming pressure from the rest of the family. Derek updated me throughout the day, reporting that building security had increased patrols of my floor after my family's confrontational behaviour raised concerns. "Your father called the management office this morning," he said. "The weekend manager told me Dad demanded to speak to someone about fraudulent sublease documentation, but was informed all your paperwork was properly filed and legally binding. This failed attempt to override my arrangements through the building confirmed I had made the right choice handling the situation through official channels rather than emotional appeals." By Sunday evening, extended family members began weighing in, having clearly received a carefully edited version of events. My grandmother called to express her disappointment that I wouldn't help poor Rachel during her time of need. My mother's sister emailed a lengthy message about the importance of sibling bonds and how I would regret this selfishness when I was older and needed family support. I archived these messages without responding, recognizing them as the next phase of escalation and expansion of the conflict to include allies who would apply even more pressure. Monday morning brought practical concerns as my father sent a terse message about Rachel's furniture, apparently sitting in a rented moving truck, accruing daily fees. "This situation is costing us money now. What do you suggest we do with your sister's belongings?" The question was the closest thing to an acknowledgement that their original plan had failed and they were forced to consider alternatives. I didn't respond immediately, letting the reality of consequences for their presumptuous actions settle in without my interference. By Monday afternoon, my mother reverted to emotional appeals, sending a photo of Rachel looking forlorn, surrounded by boxes in my parents' living room. "This is what your stubbornness has caused." The caption was a transparent attempt to shift responsibility for their failed plan onto me. I muted the conversation and spent the evening researching family therapists in our area, realizing that if any healthy relationship was to be salvaged from this mess, professional guidance would be essential. Tuesday brought the first signs of genuine recalibration, as my father's tone shifted from demanding to pragmatic. "We're looking at apartment listings for Rachel. Let us know when you're ready to discuss what happened." The brief message contained no apology or acknowledgement of overstepping, but the move toward finding alternative housing for my sister was the first real evidence that my boundary was being recognized, if not fully respected yet. That evening, I carefully crafted my first direct response since the confrontation. "I'm glad you're helping Rachel find her own place. I'll be back in town Friday and willing to meet and talk on Saturday afternoon." The message was deliberately neutral, offering a chance for discussion without apology or emotional engagement with their accusations. Wednesday and Thursday passed with minimal contact, suggesting my family was processing the situation in their own way. Rachel sent one message asking if I could store just a few boxes in my apartment until she found a place, which I politely declined, maintaining the boundary I had set. By Friday morning, as I checked out of my hotel, I felt ready to re-engage with my family from a place of newfound strength. The past week had been challenging but transformative, forcing all of us to confront long-ignored patterns of interaction. As I drove back toward the city, I knew the upcoming conversation would be difficult, but necessarily the first step in either rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms or accepting that some distance might be needed to preserve my hard-won independence. Either way, I was approaching the situation as a full adult with legitimate rights and boundaries, not as the perpetual accommodating daughter whose needs always came last. That shift in perspective, more than any practical outcome, was the true victory in this painful but necessary confrontation with family dynamics that should have been challenged long ago. Saturday afternoon arrived with golden autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the neutral territory I had chosen for our family matin. A quiet coffee shop exactly between my apartment and my parents' house. I arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a corner table with clear view of the entrance and enough privacy for our conversation. Ordering a cappuccino gave me a moment to steady my nerves and review the key points I had prepared, determined to stay calm and clear no matter how my family approached the discussion. My mother arrived first, 5 minutes early as usual. Her expression was carefully composed, but the rapid blinking betrayed her nervousness. She moved to hug me, hesitating when I offered a hand instead, a small gesture that set new boundaries from the start. My father and Rachel arrived together moments later. My father's face was stern, the expression he always wore when preparing for difficult negotiations. Rachel's eyes were red-rimmed either from tears or lack of sleep. An awkward silence settled as they took their seats, the familiar family dynamic temporarily disrupted by this unprecedented situation. My father cleared his throat, stepping into his usual role as conversation director. "Well, Olivia, I think you owe us all an explanation for your behaviour last weekend." The framing was predictable, positioning me as the transgressor, despite their actions. I recognised it as the opening gambit it was. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice steady and deliberate, "I think we need to talk about why you all made plans for my apartment without even asking me first." My directness caught them off guard. My mother's eyebrows lifted, and my father's mouth tightened at the corners. Rachel shifted in her seat, suddenly very interested in stirring her untouched coffee. My mother spoke gently, the tone she always used to calm family tensions. "We were just trying to help your sister," she said. "You have that extra room sitting empty, and Rachel needed a place to stay. Family helps family." That familiar phrase hung in the air between USA phrase I had heard countless times whenever sacrifices were expected of me, but rarely when I needed support. I understood Rachel needed help, I said. But deciding she would move into my home without asking me first, that wasn't help. That was an invasion of my space, a disregard for my autonomy. My father leaned forward, his patience wearing thin. "Olivia," he said, "this melodramatic talk about invasion and autonomy isn't helpful. We're just talking about Rachel needing a temporary place to stay, not some philosophical debate about boundaries." Dismissing my concerns as melodrama was a tactic I knew well, one that had silenced me many times before. But this time I was ready. "It is about boundaries, Dad. Healthy ones. Would you have arranged for Rachel to move into Ethan's apartment without asking him first?" The question landed hard. My father sat back, clearly thinking it over. My mother jumped in quickly. "That's different. Ethan's situation is different." The vague answer revealed a double standard I had lived with for years. "Different?" I pressed gently. "Because you respect his space and decisions in ways you don't respect mine." Rachel finally spoke up. Her voice caught somewhere between confusion and defensiveness. "I didn't know they hadn't talked to you first," she said. "They told me you were okay with it." Her words shifted something in the conversation. It wasn't just me they'd misled Rachel to, about what had actually happened. My mother's cheeks flushed as she looked down at her coffee. "We planned to discuss it with you," she said, "but we thought you'd understand once you knew what Rachel was going through." That assumption hung heavy in the room. "That's exactly the problem," I said softly. "You didn't talk to me because you assumed I'd say yes, no matter what I needed or wanted. You treated my home like it was community property, not my personal space." My father opened his mouth to respond but stopped, as if weighing my words carefully. After a long pause, he said, "Maybe we should have handled this differently. Your living situation is your business. We overstepped." That reluctant acknowledgement was more than I expected, and I felt a small weight lift from my chest. My mother still looked troubled, caught between her desire for family peace and the disruption we'd caused. "We just want what's best for both our girls," she said, reaching her hand toward mine, not touching, but close. "You've always been so independent," she added softly. "Sometimes we forget to check if you need space." The word "sometimes" barely covered decades of boundary crossing, but it felt like the closest thing to an apology I would get today. Rachel looked between our parents and then at me, her expression softer than I'd seen in years. "I'm sorry, Liv. I should have called you directly instead of assuming it was all set up. That was really thoughtless." Her straightforward apology surprised me most of all. "Thank you for saying that," I replied sincerely. "I would have been glad to help find solutions if I'd been asked respectfully." The tone of the conversation shifted, moving from blame to cautious problem-solving. My father mentioned some apartments they'd found for Rachel more affordable than she initially wanted, but within her budget with some help from them. My mother suggested a family gathering to help Rachel move once she found a place, adding carefully, "If everyone's available," with a meaningful glance at me. As the tension eased, I brought up the point I'd been nervous to raise. Going forward, I said, I need certain boundaries respected. I need direct communication, not assumptions. I need to be consulted about decisions affecting my life before they're made, and I need my right to say no, without being made to feel selfish or difficult. My father nodded slowly. The businessman in him recognized reasonable terms, even if the father in him struggled with the change. "Fair enough. We'll try to be more mindful," my mother said, reaching across the table to place her hand near my near gesture of connection without presumption. "We love you, Olivia. Sometimes we get caught up managing everything and forget you're an adult with your own life." As we prepared to leave, plans were tentatively made for helping Rachel look at apartments the next weekend. I felt exhausted but cautiously hopeful. This conversation hadn't solved everything. Decades of family patterns can't be undone in a single coffee shop meeting. But it had set a new precedent tone of respect that I was determined to maintain. Rachel lingered as our parents headed to their car, catching my arm gently. "I really am sorry," she said quietly, her voice more sincere than the usual show of remorse she'd given in family fights. "And honestly, I'm kind of impressed. I've never seen anyone stand up to Mom and Dad like that." Her words validated the difficulty of what I'd done. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but it was necessary for all of us. Watching them drive away, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally found my voice in a conversation that had excluded it for too long. Returning to my apartment after Derek's sublease ended felt like coming home to a space that was truly mine more than it had ever been before. The furniture and decorations were exactly where I left them, but something fundamental had changed. Standing in my living room alone that first evening, I ran my hand along the bookshelf my father had casually suggested clearing for Rachel's things, appreciating that every object represented choices I'd made for myself, not compromises for others. The week after our coffee shop talk brought small but meaningful changes in how my family communicated. My mother called instead of texting about family matters. Her questions were carefully worded requests, not assumptions. "We're helping Rachel look at apartments on Saturday," she said, inviting me but allowing me to say no without judgment. My father remained more distant but noticeably more respectful, replacing orders with informational updates needing no reply. Rachel surprised me most. She reached out to suggest lunch just us, sisters, with an openness I hadn't seen since childhood. Our meal revealed parts of her perspective. I'd never considered her own struggles with our parents' expectations, and her genuine belief that I had agreed willingly to share my apartment. "They always made it sound like you were happy to help, even eager," she said, picking at her salad. "I never questioned it because it fit the story they told that you were the responsible, accommodating one." Her words showed how our parents had shaped our relationship, casting us in roles that stopped real connection. "I'm trying to be more independent," she admitted. "Seeing you stand your ground made me realize how much I've let them control my life." That conversation was the start of a more honest relationship between you Sohn based on direct talk, not roles handed down by our parents. Rebuilding family dynamics on healthier terms wasn't without setbacks. My mother sometimes slipped back into old patterns, commenting that my new attitude made family plans harder. My father sometimes responded to my boundaries with cold distance, uncomfortable with the shift in power. Family dinners were tense at times. Decades of roles weren't easily dropped despite our efforts. Yet through it all, I found my confidence growing each time I calmly but firmly held a boundary. The guilt that used to paralyze me when I spoke up faded a little. When my mother called to ask me to host Thanksgiving after I'd already said no, I declined without the hours of anxious explanations I once would have given. "That doesn't work for me this year," I said simply, offering to bring side dishes for whoever hosted, and I stayed firm. The quiet pause before she accepted my response felt like a small victory, subtle, yet deeply meaningful. Rachel had found an apartment in early December, a modest one-bedroom, closer to her job than she would have previously considered. I helped her move in, and our cooperation was free from the tension that had often marked our past interactions. As we arranged her furniture together, she shared that she had started therapy, inspired in part by my example of setting personal boundaries. "I need to figure out who I am beyond being the artistic, emotional daughter who always needs rescuing," she told me while we assembled her bookshelf. "I want to become someone who can manage her own life." Her openness in that moment forged a connection between us stronger than anything we had experienced in childhood, built on mutual respect instead of the familiar family roles we had been assigned. The holiday season presented the ultimate test for our evolving family dynamic. When we gathered at my parents' house for Christmas dinner, my mother had called ahead asking what dish I could bring instead of simply assigning one. This small act was a significant acknowledgement of my adult autonomy. My father greeted me warmly, a welcome change since our last confrontation. His genuine questions about my work and plans for the new year revealed his slow but steady acceptance of the new family balance. As we exchanged gifts and shared stories, I noticed subtle shifts in everyone's behaviour. My parents consulted each other before making decisions rather than acting alone. Rachel politely declined my mother's unsolicited career advice, and I found myself comfortable expressing opinions that diverged from the family consensus. The evening wasn't perfect. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced but were consciously redirected. Still, it marked genuine progress toward healthier family relationships. Driving home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past months. From the family dinner where my parents had assigned my sister to my apartment, to this holiday gathering where boundaries were beginning to be recognized, if not fully respected, I realized that healing the distortions caused by years of unhealthy family dynamics would be ongoing. It would require vigilance and occasional reinforcement of those boundaries. Yet, the fundamental change had taken place not only in how my family treated me, but in how I viewed myself in relation to them. I had learned that standing up for myself did not mean severing ties or inviting constant conflict. Instead, it meant creating space for authentic connection based on mutual respect, rather than fulfilling prescribed roles or unexamined expectations. As I unlocked my apartment door and returned to the sanctuary I had fought so hard to protect, I felt gratitude not just for these walls and the refuge they offered, but for the stronger sense of self I had discovered within them. The most important lesson from this painful family confrontation wasn't about property rights or living arrangements. It was the truth that healthy relationships require both love and boundaries, care and respect. By finally saying no to a boundary violation I would once have silently accepted, I opened the door to saying yes to a more genuine, honest connection with my family. One built on who we truly are, rather than who we were expected to be. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to protect your boundaries? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes, the hardest people to set boundaries with are the ones we love most. But as I've learned, it's often the healthiest choice we can make for ourselves and our relationships. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and personal growth. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for building authentic relationships that can truly stand the test of time.